Alright, I'm Mike Nichols with RNK Solutions. Just a little bit quickly about us. We've been around 30 years. Again, here in this area, really we focus on real property and facility services and software solutions over the last 30 years, which has really translated into working with a lot of really large portfolios. So Department of Defense, as an example, has 650,000 plus facilities. And in doing that, we tend to spend a lot of time on the data collection side of work, or working with people that are doing data collection. So over the last 16 years, I've gotten an opportunity to work with our, anywhere from engineers and master planners to interior designers to CAD folks in bringing in data. And really, whether it's federal government, hospitals and health systems, or higher education, I think we've seen a lot of the same points that people have been mentioning all day today in terms of issues that they're dealing with in terms of data collection and users and getting them used to the different systems. So what we wanted to focus on a little bit when I had talked with Ben was how we're leveraging that information, the data collection. So. And even talk a little bit about how we integrate this with Iform Builder with our product called GoRPM. And that was really just geospatial real property management, and really born out of all the years of trying to aggregate all these different data sets together into a way that we could standardize business processes, access the information, visualize it, take geospatial and non-geospatial data, and then analyze it, trends, benchmarks, key performance indicators. So with that, really, I just wanted those two slides to kind of set the background. Okay, so we'll just assume we've got some formatting issues here. Yep. We've switched, but the story, the general story here that I wanted to talk about was this process that we go through, and really I think there's been two conversations today that I've heard people talking about, and that's I have a set of information that I want to get into Iform Builder, that I want to go out in the field and validate and collect, and then bring back into that solution to do analysis against. So that's certainly one scenario, what I would typically call field validation, and maybe the other scenario is population of data that does not exist. So those are sort of two scenarios that we'll walk through here, and often when you're doing field validation, right, you find things that didn't exist in your data set, so you're really doing both. So in running through that story, I was going to use a couple of videos just to, and these I'm sure all going to magically work. All right, so just quickly from the visualization, analyzation, and report standpoint, it's going to get blurry, but this is the product that we actually leverage pushing and pulling data from with Iform Builder. And in this case, really all I'm doing is visualizing a set of facilities, buildings, and that's me actually running a space dashboard, as you can clearly tell. I wanted to tell a story about just collecting one attribute of data, and that's maybe a space class for a particular set of rooms. I mean, this really would apply to any data set, but here I am basically just looking at a floor, and looking at a set of data associated with that floor and net square footage as an example, and actually visualizing that on the map. Well, I want to really just focus on office space, and that's sort of the area that I'm going to use for this demonstration in terms of pushing it all the way through and back around. So you can see I've narrowed this down to just these offices and looking at that information. So I have what I'm interested in, and I think in terms of, well, that came out great too. There was this nice pretty funnel here and everything that was going into it. So I'll know next time not to switch from the PC to the Mac. But here I am, I'm bringing this information out of GoRPM. I'm funneling it down into Iform Builder. Buildings, rooms, and floors, or building floors and rooms. So one of the instant conversations we have is when pushing data to go out and be validated. So our example may be we have 500 buildings that we're going to go do validation on. across 4 teams, and we want, we're going to do all the standard things that you're seeing in iForm Builder. Bring in those forms and subforms, populate the data, do the form assignment out to the staff, just really go through that entire process, right? We've got every problem that I've heard everybody talk about today, from getting, we've got guys that put the iPad in their clipboard holder to carry it around, to dropping it off the roof, to, we're down in a machine room and there's no internet connection, so you want the disconnected state. I mean, just everything I've heard today is makes me feel great to know somebody else is going through that. So as far as field validation and collection, just for demonstration purposes here, let's just pretend that I'm going into a building and there's some changes that have occurred to this organization from a space perspective. So, if I'm in a hospital, right, people are moving around nonstop. Somebody moves out, somebody else moves in, somebody squats on somebody's space, right? There's all sorts of real world implications to maintaining and keeping this information up to date. And I'm going to go out and do a validation and capture this information using iForm. And we have clients right now. I mean, just as a kudos to iForm, I've got a client that we started doing their own field validation about 3 weeks ago, and they literally emailed me. It was a CAD tech, and came back and said, "This is the best thing since sliced bread." So I mean, we get some good feedback from people. And then in terms of bringing that data in, so what I'm doing is I'm going into GoRPM on the backend configuration tool, and this is all really hard to see, but this over here is an importer. You can clearly see it says importer. I'm going to edit that importer, and basically this is just pre-configured and ready to work. So I have data coming in from iForm Builder, from the XML feed. I have data that I'm pushing to a SQL Server database. So here I'm actually just configuring that with my user ID and password. Here I'm actually clicking and refreshing the data. So I'm pulling down the feed and looking at the information that I want to parse into different areas. So now I'm just magically going across it, and you're seeing that say room, and does this have electricity? Yes, no, that sort of great stuff. So now I'm clearly looking at this beautiful example of the structure that I have in my form, and I'm looking at a space category, and now I'm actually lining that up with another space category that's in my data set that I'd like to have. So I'm going to map those two there. So I can map, I can transform, I can filter, I can bring multiple data sources together as I'm pulling that together from iForm. And then I can execute the importer. And of course this is something you can do on a routine basis, or really however it's necessary. You can schedule it on the backside, and lo and behold, you can clearly read here that I brought in 339 records. So I've got my data, I've gone out, I've done my assessment, I've got integration to bring that into a data structure. Well, the other example I wanted to talk about was building that data structure to put it. So here I'm starting with a blank package, if you will, and we'll just call it example for that purpose. And I'd like to bring that in, and what I'm going to do is actually go out to iForm Builder. So you can see this is blank, there's nothing here. This is so humorous, but it's really, it's an empty set here. I'm going to go out to iForm Builder, and all this says in the menu is import from iForm Builder XML. I'm going to grab put in my URL, user ID, and password, push the data, click the button, and now I've actually created a structure to store my information from iForm Builder. So when we start talking about doing analysis against it, I've looked at my data types. As I've brought that in, I see everything here. Maybe there's some tweaks I want to make to how I'm storing this information, but I have a structure that I can instantly start to put logic against. I can do small rules, creating badges, make it show up, make it integrate with the map. So again, the example that we're talking about, we're pulling that information in data we may be collecting with GIS or non-GIS attributes and tying that to rooms. So we pushed out 330 rooms for somebody to actually go out and survey, validate in iForm, and then push back into the system. I had a couple of screenshots here as backup for the videos, so I think that's a plus. But this is just an example of, I've edited an importer, and you can see I've grabbed my Iform Builder XML structure and or feed, and I'm taking that level, which is just a space classification attribute basically, and saying, hey, I want to map that to the definitions that I have created in my own data structure. And you know, that data structure may be any data structure. I mean, I may have simply just gone up here as well and clicked import from SQL Server and produced that structure. Or it may be something where, you know, you've had a conversation and you've laid out a whole structure. Somebody was talking about standards. There's keeping attention. So, so somebody was talking about different standards. You know, when we work across our different clients, there might be space standards, standards for doing condition assessments. I can't tell you how many standards our Department of Defense clients have or federal clients have that we may want to capture and store information in. Just a quick example of something that we run into on the backside too. So doing transformation. So for any particular piece of information that I want to bring into Iform Builder, I may be interested in doing something like converting that to uppercase. So again, when you talk about efficiency, gains. If you see somebody go out in the field and collect 300 street addresses, or they're interviewing people, and maybe somebody's telling them where something is, so there may be an actual case where I can't pull that down by GPS. Well, there may be you may have something as crazy as a requirement for that to be all uppercase when you're pushing it back to another system from a view standpoint. If I had $1 for every time somebody complained about seeing 2 cents on the end of $1 million number, you know, as an example. So you need a way to manipulate that information as well. So this gives you a way to do that. In this case, I'm just setting this to uppercase. Also, filtering, bringing in that information. So maybe I don't want to bring in anything that's null, or I don't want to bring anything that has a blank value or has an other value. You know, different things that I'm doing is I'm going through that process. So there's a lot of different things that are necessary there. I think probably, I bet everybody's run into everything they can imagine. And so where does the story end? Well, here's before my room assessment that I did on the iForm. So you can see my office space is sitting at around 3,000 square feet. And after the assessment, and I brought those results in, it's down to 203. So basically what I did for demonstration purposes is turn everything into a laboratory. But that's a very real world scenario that's happening all the time, and I'm just sort of following one little attribute through the lifespan of an organization. You know, I mean, I've heard half a dozen conversations today about all sorts of different pieces of data that people want to analyze, visualize, integrate, aggregate. You can throw all those terms at it. With that, questions?
What's your time to implementation on all this?
So the implementation can range anywhere. That's such a loaded question, but you know that's the answer to. Implementation can range anywhere from a day to years. That's partially dependent on a client's how they're set up, what they're interested in doing. What's my implementation time to take an iForm and bring it into the system?
Well, I would say
less than an hour. Yeah.
Well, maybe a better question. What was your time to basically wrapping all these other pieces around the iForm side of things?
So
a year, 6 months, 3 months.
I had so from a product development standpoint, we made a conscious decision that we were happy enough with our field trials of Iform Builder to roll it into to the product just as something that people could click on. So my clients, my staff. So maybe all said and done in a month. Again, we've put a lot of, we've come from a very, the background that we came from was really about aggregating and analysis and being able to consume the next data set that I don't know about. So we have our framework is very flexible. I mean, really some of the same conversations you were talking about.
Yeah.
You want to be agile, you want to be flexible. There's an 80% solution.
Well, I think you made a good point too. It doesn't matter the data source. SQL Server, is it Iform Builder, or is it the next online spreadsheet?
At the end of the day, I want a place where I can plug in Access, SQL, spreadsheets, comma-delimited files, Oracle, whatever the next web service is that I don't know about that somebody wants to integrate.
I had a question. Earlier in your slides, you were showing that you do mapping from iForm form to the GoRPM.
Yes.
What happens when there are any changes or any data structure changes that you have to do on the iForm side? You have to redo the mapping and...
Yes. Yeah. So any structural changes that so obviously I'm going to be looking through the XML feed, and it's either going to be successful or fail depending on what's set up. But yeah. But as far as that configuration is concerned, at this stage I make the changes and just republish this schema.
Oh, you republish?
Yeah.
It's almost like reporting. You're building a schema after.
Yes, right. So we really, again, we run into two scenarios. We build iForms to go do some data collection, and I don't know what the schema is going to be. Well, I don't want to have to go build all that in the system, right? That's a lot of work because I just did it in iForm. Let me grab that XML schema and generate it. So I may have something in a holding. Maybe I've got a form and I'm putting that in a holding place till I can then validate it or move it somewhere else or do some analysis against it. So we have things as an example where from a reporting perspective, and for photos too, I didn't demonstrate this, but this is the same principle for photos. So I want to bring photos into the system and see them in a very easy to understand format, or maybe I want to report on those photos. Or we've even had scenarios where we have had half a team go out and do data collection. So these projects might run over months. Half a team has done it with Iform Builder, and the other half of the team had done something manually, or something has failed in an automation standpoint, and we've got to blend those two together. So maybe we bring in 250 photos from a file location, 250 photos from Iform Builder, and populate that in a report, dump it out. Really, the possibilities are endless.
So GoRPM, is that the tool you built? Or?
Yeah, that is our, so when talking with and showing it to Ben, GoRPM is our commercial off-the-shelf product. We built integration to GoRPM.
Do you see in the future that rather than have to manually republish the schema, you actually will try to detect schema changes on our end, and then
I see all sorts of possibilities in the
Sweet.
future.
Yeah.
Part of this too is, so there's multiple parts to this conversation. I think there's one, what can I do with the API? There's one, what can I do really with the out-of-the-box with Iform Builder?
Yeah.
And I take that really a step further, particularly when I talk about organizational buy-in. So if I can take something that people have been working in basic access databases or Excel spreadsheets and let them build forms and let them go through an import process here, which, this isn't really much worse than something I'm really putting together in Access from a technical standpoint. Right. They feel empowered, right, to be able to do that themselves, to buy into using the product, to buy into automation, right? We have conversations, I think I was mentioning that earlier with somebody, about getting people to use an iPhone-sized screen, 4-inch screen on one coast, and getting people to use a 10-inch screen on the other coast. It's a legitimate conversation where people want to see that paper form. So really a lot of those what was the acronym that was being used?
SAMR?
Yeah, SAMR. I'm so going to use that.
It's a good one.
That's great in terms of producing buy-in. So part of what we actually did too when we were initially looking at this was we wanted people to buy in at a very basic level and not even be worried about an API. The rest is just kind of good. It just
Icing on the
goes
cake
from
later.
there.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. Any other questions?
So who is actually creating the forms?
The forms are created by anybody. So the forms are standard forms out in Iform Builder. I mean, you're just going out and, well, actually, this is a two-part question. So the forms are, could be standard forms that somebody is building to get ready to go out in the field to do work. So, I mean, if it's something very simple, that could be any user. When I get into scenarios, and this, I wish the filter was here, that makes it so much more fun. But when I get into examples where I have more complicated sets of data where I'm producing, so in this example, what I'm actually doing is producing the 3 different CSV files to upload. So those are just being scripted to produce. So that's that field validation data. But in that case, you know, I have more complex data sets. But that's still, I mean, it's still an end user. In all cases, this can be an end user or somebody in their organization. There's just kind of two. Is that a fair statement? There's kind of 2 scenarios we tend to run into: the more complicated ones and the more simplistic ones that people want to. That's at least what I've found in the clients we've worked with and with our own staff.